Welcome to Inside the Practice, your go-to podcast for stories, tips, and insights from professionals helping dental practices thrive. Hosted by Alan Hollander and Sarah Boylan, and sponsored by ePractice Manager. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, and welcome to Inside the Practice, your go-to podcast for expert-led discussions and actionable insights in the world of dentistry and its specialties. I am your host, Sarah Boylan. Today I am joined by Mr. John Van Leeuwen, one of the founding members of Green Sale Transitions, an organization dedicated to helping doctors buy and sell dental practices. And I got to tell you, I am really excited to have you here because you helped me in 2018 buy and sell a practice. So I got to work with you firsthand, which was such a great, seamless experience. And I'm excited to share more about your services and what you do and things to look out. So John, welcome. Can you just go ahead and dive in and give us a little bit of background on you and Green Sale and, just
Sure.
Give us a story.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And I remember those transitions quite well. And you were a pleasure to work with back then. Very knowledgeable. One of the challenges as a practice transition expert or broker is getting good information, and you did a fantastic job. So I do remember that. In way of background, I started right out of college as a financial advisor and got my certified financial planner designation about 5 years later at the age of about 27, I think. Shortly after that, I kind of fell into, if you will, the niche of working with dentists. Back in those days when you're a young financial advisor, it's hard to kind of develop a niche because really your niche would be just about anybody that's willing to talk to you at that point. So, but nonetheless, I had a very well-known and influential dentist fell into my lap as a client, and it was a really good relationship. And he asked me if I wanted to work with more dentists, to which I replied, absolutely. And did a couple of presentations to study groups, and then got asked to write some articles. And before you knew it, it was all my clients, all my new clients were dentists. And before too long, I was working with, probably 50 or 75 of them. And then a few years later, it ballooned up to 150 or so, and then continued to grow from there. So I spent the bulk of my career, 27-ish years, including my internship in college through when I retired from that line of work, was about 27 years, and managed assets and pension plans and investments and cash and estate planning and tax planning, et cetera, for dental practices. And so I got to know dental practices very, very well. And in fact, I started to go to classes with some of my clients to help me learn more about the internal workings of a dental practice, not just on a financial standpoint, but clinical, et cetera.
Nice.
I started learning about equipment. Just became an expert within my industry, but in the dental field. And eventually merged my business into a larger, also local company. And they were sponsored by the Oregon Medical Association, and I had the relationship with the Oregon Dental Association. They did insurance and employee benefits and not asset management. I did asset management and not insurance and employee benefits. So we thought the companies would work well together, and they did. I had a 5-year earnout, and as I was getting close to that earnout, when my intent was to stay there and continue to run that division for the company, I decided that I wanted to do transitions because I had sellers in my practice and I had buyers in my practice, and I could do some matchmaking within my own client base, but also because I just felt like when I referred clients to brokers, there was a bit to be desired yet in those transitions. So I thought, maybe a little bit arrogant, but I thought at that time I could probably do as good a job, if not better, myself. So my intent was to start doing transitions as a service, not only to my client base, but to outside the client base as well, but within the financial services business. And long story short, the legalities of being a securities advisor and transacting in a non-publicly non-registered stock, if you will. In other words, a dental practice could be determined as a conflict if something went wrong. So we decided that wouldn't work legally, and I decided to go ahead and take my earnout and start Green Sale Transitions, and that was about 14 years ago now. And
wow.
So it became kind of my second career, twilight career, as my original partner, Rob Kay, used to call it. He's since retired many years ago now, but so became a broker after being a financial advisor, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. No, I absolutely love being on the transaction. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, are you working mostly with buyers or sellers, or a mix of both these days?
Both. That's one of the things I really enjoy about being a broker is that it's not, if you compare it to like a real estate transaction where you have an agent, if you will, representing the buyer and another one representing the seller, which has its benefits, but also creates some challenges. As a broker, although you represent the seller and they sign your contract and they pay you ultimately, you end up working with both parties, and these deals have to be a win-win. Nobody's trying to rip anybody off. So there really isn't a need necessarily for another broker per se. A lot of the buyers will, go to their accountants or buyer due diligence experts to help them with their due diligence, et cetera. But so we get to know the buyers and the sellers very well. Early on, we tell the sellers we're going to work heavy with you. Early on in the transition, doing the appraisal, getting into the office and inventorying all the equipment and poring over the books and records and asking you questions so that we can come up with a valuation and an appraisal. That's heavy, intensive time with the seller. And then once we get the practice listed and we start showing it, now we're dealing mostly with the buyers. And then once a letter of intent is signed and you're locked in with a buyer, then really your focus turns almost exclusively to the seller, because you got to help them with not only with their due diligence, but getting financing, getting them a lawyer, opening escrow. You kind of become the hub, and some of the spokes are buyer related advisors, accountants, lawyers, and et cetera. And then some of them are seller, banking, CPAs, and their lawyer, et cetera, and then escrow. So all those people are coming to you for information. You kind of shepherd the whole project. So short answer to your question, sorry for the long one, is that we do work with both. In terms of the numbers at any one point in time, probably more buyers than sellers. I mean, at any point in time, we might have, I honestly don't even know, maybe 15 listings going on at any one point in time, but we've got a very large buyer base that follows us. In fact, there's over 2,500 people on our email list. So
nice.
A lot of buyers.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How long does it take to do a valuation on a practice these days? Like just
if you do it the right way, we kind of estimate 20 hours of desk time. But when we're contracted by a seller, we usually tell them, and it does depend on the workflow at the moment, but we can usually get those done in a week or two. We try to do them pretty quick while the information is still fresh and et cetera. But a lot of that depends on how quickly they can get their data to you. Like you, where you had the data, and all you had to do is push some buttons and we had everything we needed, where some people aren't quite as organized, or they've got their information kind of siloed in different places and they have to go to different people to get the information and then send it to you. And sometimes they can't get the exact information, so they have to prepare some data for it. So it just depends, but a couple of weeks to get the appraisal done. And then once it's on the market, our goal is to have it in an escrow, meaning a letter of intent signed, within a month. Obviously, sometimes that doesn't happen. In fact, sometimes depending on the practice and the location, it could take many, many months. It just depends. There's lots of factors that feed in there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like having to count paper points or gut a purchase, to add into the equation as far as like all your inventory. That must be a painstaking task to go through every little box of files. But no, that's awesome. So when a dentist reaches out to you, what does that process usually look like from start to finish?
Yeah, good question. Again, there's lots of factors that feed in, but I'd say on average, we tell sellers give us 6 months.
Okay.
So again, if it's in we're kind of focused on Oregon and Southwest Washington mostly. Of course, we do things in other areas, in fact, in other states too. But if you just look at that geography, if the practice is in the greater Portland metro area, not necessarily downtown Portland, but anywhere in the suburbs or close to Portland, That's a pretty hot market. And basically just population driven. There's more buyers, there's more sellers, so there's more activity. We say 6 months. Again, some other factors that could feed in that make it more or less than that could be the size of the practice. Is it big enough that someone can come in and generate an income for themselves right out of the gate? Is it turnkey, or does it need to be built up? Is it a hybrid startup, or is it a smaller practice? 2-day-a-week practice, et cetera. That might be a little bit different. But if it's a kind of right down the middle, practice producing somewhere between 700 and 1.2 million, and is somewhere in the metro area, there's a lot of interest for that type of practice, especially in Southwest Portland, as an example. Then I would say, once the appraisal's done, we get it on the market and we start showing it right away. A month into the relationship, we should start expecting letters of intent. And so a month to a month and a half, hopefully we have something locked in. And then, it's a process from there that's driven by lots of tasks that need to be done by the buyer, including due diligence and getting financing. And if it's a leased space, they got to work with the landlord to get a new lease or an assignment of the lease. The lawyers might be backed up. They might not. Yeah. So there's lots of factors that feed in there. But the biggest one is, are they coming out of an employment arrangement where they might have 60 or 90 days notice that they need to give, right?
So that's a good point.
If they're moving into the area and they've moved here, let's say they sold a practice or they left an associateship in another state or another town, and they're here and they're ready to go. If we don't have that employer's notification period to deal with, we can get them closed, in 30 to 45 days after the letter of intent is signed. But usually it's 60 to 90, and it depends largely on the employment period. So if you give it 6 months, that gives us a little bit of cushion in that scenario that I just drew up for you. And we should get it done pretty easily in that time frame.
So as a dentist, what should they really have figured out before they start really looking, like really knocking on doors?
As a buyer?
Yeah, as a buyer, what should they have completely dialed in before they start kicking tires?
Yeah, several things. Probably the most important of which are, make sure you got your geography figured out. And my advice to anybody that's going into an associateship, if your geography is, I'm just going to use Beaverton as an example. Don't take an associateship in Beaverton, because you're going to have a non-compete that disallows you from owning or practicing in that, and usually within at least a 5-mile radius of where you're working. So work somewhere away from. So to answer your question, figure out your geography. Where do you want to land? And some people are pretty flexible on that. That's great. But if you have a specific geography, or you want to dial in a specific geography, like take into account where you want to educate your kids, et cetera, get that done right up front, early on. And then the second one I'd say is get a banking relationship going. You need to get pre-qualified. Isn't the right term. That's not a term the banks like to use, but they like to get you teed up and ready to go and kind of give you the wink, wink, nod, nod. Yes, we like you, and we've looked at your finances, and we won't have any problem financing you for a practice up to X amount, right? Have that relationship ready to go, because that can put you in a strong position against other buyers that might not be ready. And usually they are, frankly. So there might not be a competitive advantage as much as it just makes the process so much quicker and easier if you've got that going. And then I'd say just make sure that you're ready to be a business owner. Consider the work-life balance changes that it's going to bring to your life. Personally, I think it's a great business, and I can't imagine not owning my own business. I've always been a business owner. I know so many business owners, dentist business owners, and they love the lifestyle that it affords them, and the flexibility that they have, the control that they have. But then others, a lot of them try it and then they decide they don't like it for whatever reason, and that's fine too. So make sure that you're ready to be an employer and be a business owner. That's very important too. And then clinically, just make sure that you've got your skills honed, your speed's up, you're confident, and you can sell dentistry, because it's going to be a requirement. If you check all those boxes, don't wait, get on it. It's the best career you could could hope for.
I love it. That's such a great answer. And at ePractice Manager, that's one of the things that we really work hard with our doctors and our clients is to really help fine tune some of those business skills to be able to be business owners and all that. So
Yeah, and it's not rocket science. If you don't know it, there's lots of resources out there. So
yeah.
don't let that scare you away.
And then what are buyers missing? Like, what are they not paying enough attention to? You hit the head with the geography. That was a really good response. I liked that one. What else should they be thinking about when they're looking at their practices?
In terms of the target practices themselves, other than the obvious ones, like I mentioned, the geography, et cetera, I'd say they're not paying close enough attention to the procedures that are being done in the practice and ensuring that they've got the skills to carry on. A lot of sellers, luckily, have kind of slowed down or maybe gotten picky in their late careers and have given up doing some difficult endo or whatever. They just like to do the plain. This isn't always the case, obviously, but a lot of them are just kind of doing the bread and butter restorative dentistry, and they refer out a lot of specialty cases, which for a buyer that has the skills to do those things is a great opportunity for them, obviously. But it can work the other way around too, and that's a mistake that I don't see often because it is something that's pretty obvious to look at. But make sure that the practice isn't doing a ton of oral surgery that you can't do,
Right.
sleep dentistry that you can't do, or difficult endo or extractions, surgical extractions. All of those things. Make sure that implants. A lot of doctors are doing implants, and if you're buying a practice that's heavy on implants, you better be prepared to be able to keep that business in house.
Yeah, provide that service. Absolutely. Okay, so flipping to the other side now on selling the practice, when should a dentist realistically start thinking about selling their office, selling their practice?
Well, if I had it my way, I'd say a couple of years in advance.
Okay.
Part of the reason I like that long lead time is because I was a financial advisor, a financial planner, and you got to kind of have your ducks in a row, and it's not just about the practice; it's about your life and being prepared financially to make that big transition. It's a big life event. The one mistake, and you probably asked me about mistakes, and I'll come back to this, but one mistake that I see made is that buyers tend to hold on too long before. They should have sold last year or the year before. Because they kind of slow down, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This kind of cuts both ways. It kind of depends on your overall financial situation. But if your goal is to get maximum value for your practice, financial value for your practice, then obviously you want to sell it when it's doing peak production and peak profitability. But if you hang on to your practice, into your golden years, and a lot of people do because they love the craft, and they don't worry so much about the money anymore. Then the profitability goes down, maybe even the collections go down, and so therefore does the value of the practice. So that's a mistake that I see made often, hanging on too long.
Yeah,
But plan ahead. We'd like to come in and look at things, and there's usually not anything major that needs to be done to prepare for a practice other than these few things. One, if you're not digital, probably should give yourself some time and really consider making that change, as painful as it might be, because buyers all want digital practices. It doesn't mean you can't sell one that isn't, but it sure makes it more attractive to buyers if it's digital. And there's still a lot of doctors out there that haven't embraced that technology. So I'd consider that. What else? If you're going to try, one mistake that's made is that doctors tend to harvest a bunch of procedures out of their patient base before they sell to get the production up and maximize the value. And that's really not a good idea, because when buyers come in and do their chart audit and they're looking at what the procedures are being watched and kind of stored up for the next few months or few years, they can quickly identify that all the procedures have been done and there's nothing to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's a mistake. So I'd point that out to them. But I'd also say, if you're going to concentrate on increasing your numbers at all in those last couple of years or many months, concentrate on doing that on the hygiene side, because the way the appraisals are done, there's a penalty, if you will, that goes against your profitability, that's tied to what the doctor production is. Not the total production, but the doctor production. So the hygiene production is not subject to that ding, we call it, within green sale. So if the increase in production on the hygiene side is worth a whole lot more than it is on the doctor side.
Nice. Yeah. So do you ever have doctors that think their practice is worth more than what it is, and the valuation comes back and they're obviously disappointed that their product isn't as high? How do you handle that disappointment? Like, is there anything you can do to work through that with them?
We could have a whole podcast just on that one topic. It's unfortunate, because frankly, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to get into practice transitions, is because I, as a financial advisor, was shocked at how low dental practices sold for relative to their annual owner's discretionary income or their profit.
Right.
And it's a multiple of like 2 times your annual profit, maybe a little bit more. Not good, not a lot. And so fortunately, most dentists know that they're never going to be able to sell their business for, a windfall, life-changing windfall, and retire on it. So they plan for building assets in other ways too. But there is value there, and you should capture it. Unfortunately, the value compared to most other businesses is very low, which is, again, probably a whole nother podcast we could have about why private equity has jumped into the market to capture that, because there's upside from where practices sell on the private market to what they're worth when they're combined together in groups of 10 or 100 or 1,000. The value goes way up, and that's what's happening with consolidation. That's the whole reason the industry is consolidating. And if you think it's for any other reason, you need to rethink that, because that is the reason. So back to your point, there's oftentimes disappointment. Unfortunately, it is what it is, and you might as well get something for your asset. It's a meaningful chunk of money. Of course, Uncle Sam takes their chunk, and that even makes it more painful. But you got to capture it.
Those capital gains taxes are brutal. Okay, so what about let's talk about real property with it, real estate. So a lot of these practices are located in a lease situation. But when we have real property attached to it, obviously that's going to increase the value of the practice when it's sold. What does that whole look like in that situation where you're just trying to sell a practice that's got real property with it? What's different than just the practice alone?
Well, a couple of things here. First, and when there's a building available, we always get a little more excited even about the opportunity for us as brokers, because there are a lot of buyers out there that will not buy something if they cannot own their own real estate.
Gotcha.
So I always tell sellers, if you own a building, and a lot of times they're indifferent about whether they want to sell it or not, and oftentimes though, and some other times though, they are adamant that they want to keep the building. And I always say, well, if you're indifferent, let's make sure that we include that possibility in our advertising, because it will bring more people to the table for sure. By a factor of 2 at least. So in terms of the value of the practice, it doesn't change the value of the practice, but the 2 assets together obviously add up to a much higher price tag than the practice alone. But a lot of buyers out there want to own their own real estate. We transact both assets. We'd like to have control of both assets because they're tied together. It's almost like you're selling one going concern, but there's two assets. And what becomes problematic sometimes on the real estate is that, the practice owner, the building owner has a brother or uncle or cousin that's a realtor, and they want to hire them to do the real estate. But the problem is we're the ones that are going to find the buyer, because it's going to be the buyer of the practice that buys the real estate. It's never going to be the buyer of the real estate that buys the practice. If you sell the real estate on the real estate market, chances are the only people that are going to be interested in buying it are somebody that wants to turn it into a CPA's office or a massage parlor or something else, right? So freestanding building usually is going to be purchased by somebody not so much as an investment, but as a house for their business. So that's not always the case, but that's generally the case, I'd say. So we find a buyer for the practice that also wants a building, and then we take care of the whole transaction. And there's a lot of interrelationship between the two assets. Like when you're dealing with the practice, it's how much is your occupancy cost going to be, and it depends on if you own it or lease it. And we have to do all the work on what should the lease be, or what are the payments going to be on the financing, and sometimes there's negotiating back and forth between the two assets. Well, if I'm going to pay this much for the building, then I would actually like to pay $100,000 more on the building and $100,000 less on the practice because my accountant says it, blah blah blah. There's it's a puzzle.
I was going to ask you that. Is it two different finances for that? Like we have one on the real property and one on the business, or is there financing for both?
There's financing for both, for sure. On the practice side, the banks will finance 100% of the purchase price, so the buyer doesn't have to put anything down. They'll even loan extra for buying the accounts receivable, and they'll even loan extra on top of that, oftentimes for working capital or a combination of AR and working capital. So 100% financing on the practice side. The building side is a little bit different. You've got to either bring some cash to the table. If you have no cash, 10 to 20% down for the building, then oftentimes the seller of the building carries a note. So the dentist, if they own both assets, would get cashed completely out on the practice side, and maybe 80 or 90% cashed out on the building side, and they will carry a separate note for that difference. And usually the bank that finances those two assets is the same bank. Although it can be different banks, but usually the banks that do finance dental practices also like to do the real estate. So they'll come back in a year or two after the building's been owned and payments have been made regularly, and they'll refinance it, and then they'll cash that note out for the seller a year or two down the road.
Oh gosh, you must have tons of experience when it comes to structuring deals of all kinds. Do you have a story for me? Do you have like one of your favorite wins or losses even?
Oh boy. I don't know if I can think of, and there's so many.
Well, this one was an off the cuff question. I just like you said, your experience. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some good success with helping doctors and since COVID, there's been a lot of young to middle-aged doctors that have just decided they don't want to be owners anymore. And but they still want a job, right? They still need to work. They're not retiring. Used to be, 10, 12 years ago or more, that 90% of our new clients were doctors that were like, hey, I'm ready to sail off into the sunset. I'm done. I'm retiring, and I want to transition in the next 6 months or next year or in the next 3 months, and I want to be completely done. And so our deals were, retiring doctors close on a Friday, and on Monday, the new doctor's in there, and the old doctor's pretty much gone. Maybe sticks around for a week, is available by phone for a few weeks. It's just like a line in the sand. And nowadays, it's probably 40% doctors that are just still working age and still have a lot of gas in the tank, but they just don't enjoy running the business. And it's become harder to run the business, and it's become less profitable to run a business too, just with inflation, cost of employees, and especially on the hygiene side.
Yes.
So, some of our most recent wins have been successes there, where we've been able to find buyers for a practice where the current owner doesn't want to operate it anymore, but they still want to work there. So nice. We've had some good successes in finding buyers that will come in and own and operate the practice, maybe even do some work in the practice, but leave the schedule open for the seller. That's fun. We've had our challenges. We had one recently. It seems like practices that are selling to associates have been for some reason, there's something in the water, and those have become difficult for whatever reason. But we've had a few of them where the buyer and the seller, even though they like each other and they've worked together for X number of years already, end up not caring for each other a great deal at the end of that. So, my advice is somebody that's considering selling to associate, it can be a great way to go. Don't get me wrong, but you should have a backup plan in mind in case things don't come to fruition. So even in cases where we're hired to do the appraisal for a seller that already has a buyer, we like to encourage them to let us go ahead and put it on the market and bring in backups and make sure that they're getting maximum value for the practice too, because that's another thing. The associates generally want some sort of consideration for the fact that they've worked there and helped grow the production. And
right,
we have one other podcast on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a good topic also.
Not a fan of that. Associates have been paid for the work they did. If they want a concession on the purchase price, then they should pay back what they've earned as an employee, because they weren't an owner during that time frame. They didn't take the risk. So,
they didn't take the risk. That's the thing. Right?
They got paid. So
yeah, exactly. Well, that's really interesting. And almost, maybe if somebody's thinking about, selling down the line, maybe having some sort of, operating agreement ahead of time, put in place would be a good idea. So,
always. Yeah. You got to have good legal work, good legal representation on all of this stuff, whether it's hiring an associate or an employment contract with an associate, certainly good representation on both the buyer and the seller side during a transition. There's great lawyers out there. We've worked with them all. They're fantastic. They all know and work with each other well. The buyers and sellers generally get along. Sellers, generally are not in this just to make money. They're in this to assure that the practice continues on in a fashion that they're accustomed to and their patients are accustomed to. They care about their patients. They care about their staff. You'd be shocked at how often that's like the first thing that comes up with, I know, isn't it? It's pretty cool. Very rarely is the first conversation about how much can I get, it's about the money. It just isn't. And that's one of the things I love about this work is they really are truly concerned about who takes the torch from them. And it's fun to find that person and make that introduction and work through that transition process so that it is truly a win-win at the end and everybody's happy. And that's
for sure.
Really, and it's reward.
We become the work family, right? Like we spend more time with each other during the week than we do with our own family. So it's great to be able to, to hear that that's the main concern for the doctors when they're looking for selling their practice.
That's what we call a good seller. Oftentimes when we're talking to a buyer about a potential target practice, we'll say that, and he or she is a really good seller. And let me tell you what that means. They care about your success. They want to make sure that you fit with the patients and the staff. And sometimes they decide that they're not a good fit. They might like them, but they might not be a good fit clinically, just with practice philosophy or personality wise. Sometimes like when we have a female seller, we really like to try and find another female. It doesn't always work out that way, but I think it's more important to at least consider that when you have a female seller versus a male seller. If you have a male seller, male or female doesn't really make much difference. But a lot of times with a female practice, some of the patients are there because it's a female and a softer touch, and
Yeah, absolutely. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to dive in really quickly about DSOs and your take on DSOs and, what complexity does that, bring to your table when you've got an office. Obviously with multiple locations, are you seeing a lot of that? Are you seeing just big corporate dentistry coming in? What do you see here?
Well, I'm seeing it all around us and all around the country. Yeah. Corporate dentistry has really, evolved. I should say, have only sold one single practice to a national DSO. We've sold a few to more micro local DSOs. They're not really DSOs. They're just groups of owners that like to have multiple locations. It's a good model. So that's totally different. But if you look at just like the big names, the MB2s and the Heartlands and whatnot, Signature, we've only sold one practice ever. So we're very pro private practice. I love private practice. I would like to see private practice continue as a cottage business. I'd like to see it passed on to the next generation.
For sure.
Love the idea of corporations coming in for various reasons. I think the quality of care goes down. So we're always excited to brag to our sellers that, unless you want to sell to a DSO for a reason, which that one case, there was a really good reason and it made sense. We did it. Unless you have that, we're going to find a private buyer, and pretty much everybody is down with that. They want another private buyer to come in. So lots of consolidation. My concerns are, the obvious ones, quality of care, the leveraging of these assets. Private equity came into the fray and started funding these DSO acquisitions when things were really good financially, and you could kind of see the handwriting on the wall that wasn't going to last forever. And sure enough, as of late, there's a lot of DSOs that are really struggling. In fact, there's a lot of them that are dumping practices now. Like I just heard,
really,
one of the big ones is selling a chunk of 50 right now.
Wow, that's crazy. I've not heard that. That's interesting to hear.
Well, they're over levered. They're borrowing money at 20%, and the private equity. These are not kind, generous people. These are smart people that need to produce a 20 to 40% rate of return each year for their investors, for their shareholders. So, they're not buying these businesses to help improve the quality of life of the dentist or improve the quality of care for the patients. Believe me, there may be elements of that within the layers of a DSO, but when you're private equity backed, you have to deliver big profits for them every year. So every expense is going to be looked at. Corners are going to be cut. Staff is going to be changed. Doctors may even be told in some ways how to, produce or do their procedures or treat patients. Doctors end up not liking that and end up spinning out, and then the whole deal falls apart. They don't get their earnouts. They don't get their, some of their forfeit, some of their stock options, or what you might, however the deal is structured.
To get the practice back.
It's just not a great scene.
Wow. Well, that's crazy to hear, but I appreciate your insight on it. Okay. So last question, for someone who's early in their career, what should they really be focused on before jumping into ownership?
Yeah. Well, we kind of touched on that before. I can tell you this, and I keep track of this stuff. We've sold 2 practices to doctors right out of school. 2. And I think I've done over 300 total. 2. Both of them were orthodontists.
Okay.
One of them was like 2 years ago, and the other one was many years before that. So the typical buyer is not someone right out of school. They're not ready, right? The banks aren't ready to finance them necessarily either. Some of them will. So it's not an impossibility, but they need to make sure that they're confident, they got their skills and their speed up. And make sure that they're ready to be a business owner. And like I said, it's a lifestyle change. It's a work-life balance change. Be prepared in your personal life before taking that on. So be prepared clinically, be prepared in your personal life, and be prepared financially too. Have yourself, fairly cleaned up. You don't want to go out and start looking for a practice when you're loaded up with bad debt. There's a bad debt and a good debt component. If credit cards are not good, car loans for exceedingly expensive cars are not going to look good. Make sure you're careful about expanding your personal life too much before you buy that practice, because it can get you in trouble.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you definitely opened up a few other topics that I would love to sit down with you, and we'll have to make that a follow-up episode to keep moving that forward. But anything else you want to tell our listeners?
Well, I would love to just make sure that everybody understands that private practice dentistry is still the way to go. It might be a little bit more difficult these days to operate with staffing challenges, et cetera. Inflation, but those things will cycle through. Believe me, they always do. private practice it should be a focus for the future of the industry. To the students out there, don't shy away from practice ownership. I know you're graduating in most cases with an awful lot of debt. That's good debt. That debt is going to afford you the ability to have a very nice income and a very, very nice and balanced lifestyle. So don't be afraid of that debt. I equate it to a mortgage. You have a lot of debt on your mortgage, but you're also controlling an asset that goes up in value. Same with your school debt. It's a lot of debt, but it gives you the license to go out and make a really, really good life for yourself. So don't necessarily rush to pay that debt off either before you start saving some for your future. That's another mistake. It goes back to putting my other hat on as a financial advisor. Use that light leverage with those good assets and go ahead and finance those, and don't rush to pay those off. Make sure you pay yourself too along the way.
Perfect. And if any doctors that are listening want to buy or sell a practice here in the Pacific Northwest, how do they get a hold of you? What's the best way to contact you?
Go to our website. It's color green, sale, SAIL, not SALE. So green sale as a boat sale, like in a boat sale. Transitions.com. There's lots of resources on there, including contact information. But in fact, I would encourage everybody to join our email list. So the very first pop-up screen is, get on our email list. The only thing we send out on our emails is new listings, and it's just a one-page flyer. It says, practice available, Southwest, Portland, 5 ops doing this much, and you won't know whose practice it is on purpose, but you'll see the price and you'll see the details of the practice. And we like that because even if you're not looking to buy a practice, maybe it'll help you plan for your eventual exit. But also maybe you'll think of somebody that might be right for that practice, because we've sold practices to people that came from New York and other places, far away, because someone sent them our email flyer. So get on there. It keeps you apprised of what's going on in the market, and you may be able to help us find a suitor for a practice. So we also post all of our associate opportunities on there. So we have both a page where doctors who are looking for associates can post that they're looking for this type of associate. And then we have another page alongside that where doctors that are looking for work can post their availability.
Nice. That's helpful.
So greensaletransitions.com, and then my personal phone number is 503-320-8991. And I got a great team behind me, AJ, Nancy, and myself being the main brokers. And then we have good support behind that too.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to spend with us. And and thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us on Inside the Practice. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share the show with your colleagues in the dental community. If you're looking for support or guidance to take your practice to the next level, contact ePractice Manager for a free consultation. For now, that's it. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Inside the Practice.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for joining us on Inside the Practice, sponsored by ePractice.